A new investigation has found that more than 95% of secondary schools in Scotland are allowing children to self-identify their gender. The organisation For Women Scotland authored the report, which warns that biological males can participate in female-only sports classes and enter female toilets and changing rooms because of the self-ID policy. Using freedom of information requests, For Women Scotland discovered that 9 in 10 Scottish secondary schools taught pupils that people have a gender identity that could be different to their biological sex. So joining me now is one of the directors of For Women Scotland, Susan Smith. Welcome to the show, Susan. This is very troubling. A lot of people have said that all of this kind of stuff is a bit of a myth, that it's just the product of the imagination of culture warriors. But your freedom of information requests show that the teaching of gender identity, a highly contested theory, as fact, is endemic in Scottish schools. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And it was based on FOIs that were done in England, and the results in England were substantially lower. But it doesn't really surprise us, because for a long time we have had some completely dreadful guidance in Scottish schools that's come from the Scottish government that we don't believe is legal. And we also have some very, very determined government-funded lobby groups who are also in schools and who are also giving schools advice which is not legal. So it's not a surprise, but parents should be really worried, because children are actually being put at risk because there are so many safeguarding failures here and there are so many legal failures here.
Now, to put this into perspective for English viewers, you know, a lot of people here will think of the way that Stonewall has influence in various corporations, for instance, or public bodies. In Scotland, you've got LGBT Youth Scotland, which is paid an awful lot of money to go into schools, and a lot of schools will outsource the teaching of sex education to those people. Is that the problem, or is it even, does it go higher than that?
That's a very big part of the problem. And as you say, LGBT youth get a lot of money. They get about £1 million a year from the government and local authorities and the NHS. And then they go into schools and charge the schools for them to deliver this training. They're training up teachers as well. We think they've trained about 5,000 teachers in about 200 schools. 90% of teachers have had training from LGBT Youth Scotland. They don't have any expertise in these areas, and they are an activist group. And one of the things they came out with recently, for example, after the Cass report was released, they said they disagreed on puberty blockers, and that they believed there was huge benefits in what they call gender affirming medicine. So they're actually on a completely different track to what people are now starting to realize is best practice when dealing with gender confused children. But they are not being questioned within the schools, and they need to be out. But you're right, it does go higher, because we do have this transgender guidance for schools, and that was actually originally written by LGBT Youth Scotland. The Scottish government had to review it because ministers found that it was not legal. But they've made some pretty basic changes to it. They've even got a little disclaimer in that guidance saying that schools have to take independent legal advice. So they know that it's open to challenge, and we believe that a school could face a pretty serious harassment charge at some point in the future. And it's the school and the local authority, not the Scottish government, who'd be at fault. But schools don't know this. They have no idea that they are being fed this nonsense.
Well, can I ask you, Susan, because you mentioned the Cass review there, and I know that Dr. Hilary Cass did appear at Holyrood and was questioned about this. Why is it not the case that the Scottish government has surely they have changed their mind about this on the basis of this expert study that took over 4 years to put together? I mean, even in London, West Streeting for the Labour Party has said they're going to implement the findings of the Cass review. Aren't the SNP going to follow suit and therefore presumably rewrite that guidance for schools?
Well, the Scottish Parliament did, you're right, they voted to endorse the Cass report, and in theory, yes, they should be pulling this straight away. They're not. And it's very difficult, of course, once something's in. And it may have to take a legal challenge to get it out. But runs completely contrary to CAS. And what is terrifying, what is really, really terrifying with these FOIs that we found are that parents are being positioned as the enemy. Only 4% of schools said that they would tell parents if a child decided they were changing their gender. And a lot of the excuses and rationale given for this has come from this transgender guidance for schools and from LGBT youth and so on. And it makes out that parents are potentially dangerous. So children are being taught material and parents have no oversight of it, and they should be very worried.
So that's a real problem. But one of the other things that you were talking about in your report is regarding the idea of male students using female facilities, toilets, participating or changing rooms, and then participating in sports for girls. How common is that in Scottish schools?
Well, we've got very conservative numbers actually in the report, because there were some schools where we had incomplete information. But what we found was that 60% of schools were operating mixed toilet facilities, and 55% have mixed changing facilities. And about the same amount, 54%, allow for mixed sex sports. There are very few that are actually preserving single sex. So it's I think it's 3% for sports, and it's something like 13 and 19% for toilets and changing rooms. So girls have been put in a terrible position, because we know that girls' participation in sports is quite low anyway, and that girls often drop out due to worries about body image and feeling inadequate. And if you put them in a mixed sex group to play sport, all of that gets compounded. So girls' health is seriously at risk, as well as, frankly, their physical safety and the likelihood of suffering some kind of harassment.
So finally, Susan, now that you've conducted these freedom of information requests, now that you've exposed the extent of the problem, do you think something will actually be done about it?
Oh gosh, I would like to think so, but we've been at this for a very long time, and we've come up with a lot of this information. Ultimately, I think these things do start to crumble. We've seen quite a lot of that especially within some of the single-sex rape crisis and domestic violence services. But it takes quite a while on pulling on these threads, and then something just dreadful happens and everyone says, gosh, what a terrible surprise, and we didn't see that coming. But it's really about time people sat up when they are warned and pay attention, because these things will unravel. But I'm worried that when they unravel, there will be a lot of very damaged young people as part of that damage.
Absolutely. Well, Susan Smith, thanks ever so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.